I want to sort of caveat this into a cool question that I saw from someone. And if anyone is really interested in finance, there's a really funny finance page, right? Like it's called Wall Street Oasis. And you guys should follow them on LinkedIn, right? Wall Street Oasis. And they're really funny. So it's mainly comedy. But these are the experiences of, so it's basically a group of people. It's the experiences of people in the finance industry all over the world. And you can read their personal experiences, and some of them are terrible and some of them are great. You'll find great advice there as well. You know, there's some threads that are from senior bankers that say my advice to young analysts and stuff like that. That's a lot of upvotes. But one of the things that Wall Street Oasis did this year was they, or someone from Goldman Sachs in America. And for those unaware, Goldman Sachs is like the mecca of investment banking. It's like, you know, it's thought of as the preeminent sort of big dog of the finance world, and rightfully so. Goldman Sachs, a working condition survey from their employees came out, and it was reported that analysts were reporting they were working 120 hours a week and stuff like that, and that sort of became a huge deal. HSBC, I think a few other banks, JP Morgan Chase, and a lot of Citibank, I don't even know who else, UBS as well, I think. A lot of them, analysts at their banks said, like, all right, we've had similar problems and stuff like that. And so these banks ended up paying 20K, 30K, 40K discretionary bonuses to analysts. The reason I say this is to tell you that there is a high amount of churn in investment banking. A lot of people leave, right? And this is important to know. And a lot of you will be interested in investment banking because if you're invested in hedge funds, I can tell you now 99% of you are not going to get into a hedge fund simply because you are not even at an investment bank yet. The classical route of getting into finance is usually, you get into Big Four, right? So which is your PwC, Deloitte, EY, KPMG. You get into one of these Big Four, into their corporate finance or into their audit or consulting teams, and then you move to an investment bank, and then you move to buy side. That's the usual route, and the buy side is usually PE or hedge funds. People don't, and largely PE and hedge funds usually recruit experienced people. Very rarely will they recruit, fresh graduates with no experience. So likely for all of you all who are entering the industry, you will either be in one of the Big Four to start off in finance, or if you're really lucky and you skip a step, you'll be in investment banking. And again, coming back to why that's good for your masters, your chances of skipping that Big Four step increase if you do a master's. So one of the key things that the investment banking survey laid out is that, look, these people are working ridiculous amounts of hours and they're paid very, very well, but they're working ridiculous amounts of hours for very little to no personal sort of work-life balance. Why don't you just hire more people? And that's a question that I've been battling as well, because that was my first reaction as well. Why don't they just hire more people? Goldman Sachs has all the money in the world. JP Morgan could buy, countries times over. Why don't you just hire more people? Why do they need the same analysts to, work 120 hours? Just hire 3 analysts and make them over 40 hours each. You could afford that. But the reason why is investment banking has such a steep learning curve that what I could do in an hour, I couldn't do last year in 3 days, right? So this learning curve is so steep because you're thrown into the deep end, right? And it's sort of a scale that's almost exponential, because you're looking at first, you will feel like a fish out of water. You will feel like, you don't know most things that you're doing, or even if you do know most things you're doing, they're really, really hard for you. And, you always need attention to detail, and you always feel like you need to be switched on. You can't really take a mental break in your how many hours a day you're working. But you will learn that over time, there's a very steep learning curve. And where I'm going with this is that that steep learning curve is exactly why investment bankers leave, because they get paid a lot more money for a lot better working condition in other industries. So that's why the high churn exists. Most people leave after a year or two in investment banking. Most analysts leave. And I'm going to be honest with you, and I'm not going to paint a rosy picture of investment banking with you at all. The honest truth is it's hard, and they're going to really make you work if you're at Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan. Me personally, I never work more than 50 hours a week. That's the most. 55 hours is the most I've ever worked. But I'm fortunate to be in a country with that sort of culture. It depends on where you are in the culture, which again comes back to, if you want to move abroad, it's important to look at the culture there. If you're in America, you're expected to work 80 hours, 90 hours a week, especially if you're in finance. That's expected of you. In New Zealand, if I tell my friends I worked until 6:30 p.m. today, they're going to say, dude, are you all right? Like, you're working your socks off, dude. So yeah, I mean, it's just a difference in culture. So yeah, I mean, largely the high churn comes from the place you're working in, and investment banking does have a high churn. The growth is steep though, which would mean that you, as someone who gets into investment banking as an analyst, if you've gone through that for a year or 2 years, because you've got exposure to C-suite executives, you've got exposure to high-level deals, or you've been an integral part of a deal. Even if you're a part of a large organization, if you're working in a deal, on a deal, you might feel like you're a cog in the wheel, but you're a very important cog in that wheel, right? Because if you mess up, that wheel it falls off, right? And the bus is off the road. So you're a very important cog in the wheel, even at a large organization, but even more so at smaller organizations. And investment banking divisions in any organization tend to be small. Investment banking teams are small for that very reason. But yeah, the personal growth is fantastic. You have so many career options after, including investment banking. I mean, you can continue in investment banking. You can move to private equity. You can move to hedge funds. You can move to, so that's sort of your second level. You can move to venture capital and stuff like that, and the buy side. But yeah, I'd say that it's well worth the struggle because the returns are fantastic. In finance, there isn't most people you see within finance, they don't just do one thing. They don't just do investment banking. They're all in finance, right? Because you can switch around a lot. But if you were to stay in one, and if I were to just tell you, if I were to stay in investment banking for a long time, I would probably be an analyst for 2 years. So if I start off as an analyst, probably the average time to someone's an analyst is 2 years. After that, depending on how big your investment bank is, on how much hierarchy there is in your investment bank, there might be different steps. I'll tell you the most common ones. There's sometimes a senior analyst. Otherwise, there's just analysts, sometimes senior analysts. Some banks have associates right above them, VPs, directors, managing directors. So if you see that the steps from analyst up sort of start becoming very, very big, associate is sort of fine, and then you have VP, which is sort of a senior position. And then you think director, oh, that's quite a senior position. And then that's straight up managing director. And we're like, oh, geez, like this ended quite quick. Because they are sort of, and they largely will be in smaller teams, they will be more flat structures. Depending on your organization, of course, if you work for Goldman Sachs, it's not flat at all, but they'll be largely flat structures. So your position doesn't really matter. I've known associates who make more money than VPs. I've known VPs who make more money than managing directors. So, it's all about the deals you're bringing in. And at the end of the day, the position is only the role in your organization. And so that's your movement vertically. if you're talking about lateral movement, as I said, the traditional route that people speak about is your Big Four audit, which is again EY, Ernst & Young, KPMG, PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and Deloitte. These guys have corporate finance teams, and they're called deal teams. They have corporate finance teams and consulting teams and audit and assurance and stuff like that. And if you're largely in one of these teams in that order, then you'll have a good chance of moving on into investment banking. And after working in those a couple of years, if you choose to move on from investment banking, you can move on to the buy side, which is private equity, which is hedge funds. And those are even flatter structures because those are smaller organizations. So, yeah, I mean, lateral movement is something that happens within finance quite a bit. For example, everyone that I know in my organization, nobody in my organization, we have offices in Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, and Queenstown. Nobody in those 4 offices has been in investment banking all their life. No one. So, that sort of tells you that it is sort of a diverse experience that takes you all the way to the top. And finance does allow for that diversity because places do hire from each other all the time.